I'm Sean West and I'm Managing Editor of FoodBev.com. Today I'm joined by Simon Edwards via Skype. He's Vice President of Sales and Marketing at ToneJet Limited and is a passionate advocate of social advertising and evolving technologies in printing. Would that be a good description, Simon?
Yes, certainly would be, Sean. Passionate is definitely the right word for it. I certainly believe there's a revolution in the wind, and it's time to see how digital can come into its own in that regard.
Can you give me a brief history of ToneJet Limited, and particularly your involvement since you joined the company?
Yes, ToneJet Limited is a company which has been underway for nearly 15 years now, developing a specific type of digital printing technology which is extremely tuned for industrial printing applications. My original involvement with ToneJet was in fact as a manager of the company in Australia that invented the technology. And after a brief departure, returned to ToneJet in the last 3 years to head up the business development and sales and marketing activities of the company.
So in terms of the social advertising and you being an advocate of it using packaging, and for the sake of our audience today, we're talking about food and drinks packaging, how would you explain what this is, social advertising, in layman's terms?
Well, I think the main aspect of social advertising is a combination of having products which are better pitched in terms of the images that are portrayed and the messages that are provided to the background of the people that are seeing that, but also not just their geographical, ethnic and other backgrounds, but also their social background, the sorts of people they are, the sorts of places they live. And to date, it's a very difficult thing to do with the current printing technologies and methods, is to really have something which is much more targeted and attuned to those types of groups of people and their lifestyle generally. And social media, and I guess the social marketing aspect of things, really is something which is quite focused to people's lifestyle rather than necessarily their geographic location.
Well, can you think of any good examples of really effective on-pack communication so that we can get a picture in our minds?
Well, certainly a good example, I mean, a very specific example is, let's take the sports industry. People are very passionate about their sports, very much so in Europe, and an example of how you would apply this is be able to provide products to people that they can see their favourite sports star or their local football club or that type of thing. So when they're actually holding the product, using it, they can actually reminisce about their favourite soccer star, for example. So that's a very specific example. I think more broad-ranging is to be able to promote and advertise to people in local areas which might be better focused on things that are happening in their community.
Well, that regional sort of thing is very common, isn't it? Because when you go abroad, you see sports stars you've never heard of before. And obviously it's on the same product that you have back home, except you have maybe Wayne Rooney on yours. That regional effect, it's got to be quite expensive, isn't it, for manufacturers to have to adapt to lots of different localities?
Well, traditionally it would be. I think that there's always the underlying issue of how you distribute products and the distribution process, which needs to be coordinated and managed fairly carefully. If you do truncate things down to smaller batch sizes, and that needs to be managed. But one of the fundamental things that's prevented the ability to do this, and we're not talking about being very specific, we're talking about something which goes to a certain level that it does naturally fit with people's lifestyles, but to be able to print on demand things like metal containers and plastic containers and these sorts of things, traditionally you've had to use traditional conventional methods, and yes, that is very expensive. But being able to print what you want when you want it means that you can manage that inventory, not have to overrun or underrun and these sorts of things. So that takes a lot of the issues around the cost. And don't forget, at the moment, there is quite a bit of pressure to move in that direction already. People are printing shorter runs already, not because they want to, but in fact because the market's driving them to do that. So a lot of companies already have this issue of perhaps producing products below cost in some cases to accommodate for that. So it's really which is driving which. It's really the market that's going to be driving the process rather than the other way around.
Well, you prompted my next thinking, to be honest, because I get the impression that by integrating the traditional print process with the manufacture of packages, which shorten processes and reduce wastage, I suppose, the landscape of how product packaging comes to fruition is really changing. So How does this affect traditional printing houses? Are they going to have to adapt to digital in order to survive?
Well, to some extent, yes. I think that the digital technology and digital printing is, a part of the equation, not the total solution. So conventional printing will still need to exist, and in fact they need to coexist. However, that doesn't necessarily mean in the same location, but in the same supply chain. So digital printing may or may not occur where traditional printing is. It may not be in the big printing houses and converters. It may be closer to the manufacturing where filling of product is going on. So where it fits is a very important aspect of this. And it's also not the case that necessarily digital is there to replace conventional. Conventional still has a place, but it's likewise that people shouldn't think of digital as doing that. Digital offers an ability to manage shorter runs, but it's also about how you in fact use that to explore, exploit and develop new markets rather than just trying to use it in the traditional way.
In food and drink, Simon, what markets are seeing the most demand for digital technology?
Oh, in food and drink, I guess. In food and drink, we're seeing a number of drivers in things like dairy products. There's a great deal of interest around how to be able to print dairy products more localised and more, fitting with demand.
Yeah.
Certainly in the soft drink and beverage market. Another good example would be in the beer market, particularly in Europe, where you've got a lot more breweries, particularly smaller breweries.
We've noticed that ourselves on FoodBev.com, yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually a really interesting area because they tend to have in the past quite traditional printing because of the cost profile of printing smaller runs for those sort of boutique brewery companies. And so digital really opens up for them an opportunity to change their imagery on a regular basis, provide product into other market areas which they couldn't normally do. So there's a number of key areas where we're seeing this starting to become really very interesting.
Well, let's step back a little bit. Tell me more about the differences between digital printing and conventional printing, but in specific terms of quality and technique. What is someone getting from digital that they may not get from conventional?
Well, there's a number of things. I mean, digital, there's the obvious thing of being able to print on demand, and in fact you could have every image could be different, which is a fairly extreme example and unlikely that you'd want to do that. There may be aspects of the printing you want to change from one item to the next, but it's more likely what you want to do is do a number of different images mixed in with a larger print run. So that's something, of course, you can't do with conventional because the changeover time for plates and the likes is very high. Shortest might be 15 minutes, more likely an hour. With digital, of course, you don't have to do that. You can change it from one to the next within a matter of seconds in real time. So that's obviously a fundamental driver behind digital. And the other thing is that with some digital, and this is not the case with all of them, but with some of the digital technologies, this can actually be done very cost effectively. Not necessarily the same cost as a conventional printing process per item, but getting very, very close to that. But that, of course, depends on the ability to be able to print very thin ink layers and therefore keep your ink consumption levels down.
Okay.
And that's probably one of the key drivers, is to be able to do that with digital and not have a digital process which adds a very large amount of cost to the product and therefore either pushes up the price or, once again, causes an issue in terms of trying to generate revenue from it.
Okay, I see. Well, there's probably going to be some people listening to this podcast, particularly those who are concerned, as most of us are, about recycling and the environment, thinking that is digital printing a sustainable technology. What would you say to them?
Well, I certainly think so. I mean, it's something that just, once again, there are ways you could implement digital which may cause concern there. But if you're working with inks which are in fact very similar to conventional inks, which have been shown to be, I guess, able to be managed in the recycle stream, that's important. So downstream recycling, hopefully you choose your digital technology so that in fact it doesn't cause any of those issues. That comes down to the inks you use, and obviously using inks which are as close to conventional printing inks is a big advantage. I guess from a sustainability point of view, you're hopefully using technologies where you do not need to use, a great deal of ink generally, so you're applying a very thin ink layer and therefore able to manage the process and keep the ink consumption down itself. So it's going to be a combination of using inks which are low cost, cost effective, at the same time not using a great deal.
So what does the future of digital printing look like? How will it evolve? What are we likely to see?
Well, I think what we're likely to see, particularly in food and beverage, is going to be a situation where digital will start out by probably focusing on the areas where the pain is the most, in other words, where very short runs are causing real issues in terms of using conventional technology. And the other place will be where there's upsides to new marketing opportunities. So in fact, you can either enter new markets that companies aren't in at the moment because they can manage shorter runs, or it may be new markets where in fact changing the visual aspect of the product throughout the print run could be quite valuable. And also, I guess there's the total area of completely new markets where in fact people aren't making product now, either because it is prohibitive on the print run or because you just can't create the images that customers want to see there. So it's going to really be across those three areas, I believe.
Okay. Well, Simon from ToneJet Limited, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for downloading this FoodBev.com podcast. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, Vimeo, Google+, and LinkedIn.